The wind moves gently across the plains where the Saraswati once flowed, stirring stalks of wild barley and the feathered tops of desert grasses. Along this ancient corridor, long before brick cities rise, human hands tend small garden plots, coaxing life from the earth with patient effort and silent observation. At Mergar and scattered hamlets nearby homes are made of mud, and thatch clustered like sleeping cattle beneath a vast golden sky. Fires crackle softly in clay hearths. Smoke rises slowly, dissolving into the evening as if reluctant to leave. Within these dwellings, tools of bone and flint rest neatly on low ledges and baskets, brim with gathered grain sorted with more care than enthusiasm, as if agriculture itself is still deciding whether it wishes to stay. People move slowly here, shaped by the rhythm of seasonal rains and the soft insistence of the land. They grind barley on worn stones with circular strokes that echo across generations, though the millstones never speak of their age. In nearby fields, goats bleat with dignified complaint while children chase them lazily, their laughter snagging on the wind like laundry hung too high. The settlements are quiet but not silent. The rustle of palm fronds, the whisper of reeds, the faint clink of pottery being stacked near the hearth, all combine to create a world in soft motion, with time stretching like a loom's thread between sunrise and dusk. In one corner of a dwelling, a potter shapes a jar, his thumb smoothing the neck with a movement that belongs more to memory than to thought. Each vessel is slightly different, though they all serve the same quiet purpose to hold water or grain, or sometimes nothing at all. The potter smiles faintly, not because he is pleased, but because the clay is behaving today a small victory in a world governed not by kings or scribes, but by texture and temperature. A sleepy dog dozes beside him, curled like a question with no urgent answer. Archaeologists will one day find traces of this life, a burial wrapped in red ochre, a bead of turquoise dropped beside a kiln, and wonder who lived here, and what they dreamed when they listened to the wind. But for now there are no names carved in stone, no tall monuments shouting importance. There are only small things done well, seeds planted at the right time, fish dried beside the river, ornaments fashioned with deliberate hands from shell and carnelian. The people do not seem in a hurry to leave, nor particularly determined to grow. They are not yet a civilization, only a quiet presence in the land's long story. Some scholars debate whether Mergar should be considered part of the Indus Valley Civilization proper, or merely a distant ancestor, a shy older cousin who never moved to the city. The truth may rest somewhere in the sediment layers where continuity and transformation lie, folded together like linen stored in a cool room. What is clear is that these early communities understand something crucial: how to live within the slow pulse of the rivers, and how to let earth and water take the lead. It is a kind of wisdom, if not yet a blueprint. The rivers speak more clearly in these early centuries. Each flood leaves behind a gift-thick loam that clings lovingly to bare feet and lends itself to root and furrow. The Saraswati especially seems generous in those days, carving a graceful path between belief and necessity. Cattle graze in her shadow. Paths worn by sandals and hooves trace their way toward water, toward life. And always the smell of earth after rain, a fragrance older than words, more durable than writing. If someone could capture it in ink, they might not need language at all. In these simple villages there are no grand temples, though small shrines with animal motifs sometimes perch beneath trees or beside hearths. A seated figure moulded in clay may be an idol, or merely a mother's gift to a child. The difference is not always clear, and perhaps that is the point. Here, spiritual life and daily life walk the same worn paths, carrying the same reed baskets, drinking from the same well. Sacredness clings like mist, not lightning. A sleepy joke floats across the centuries in the form of an unearthed plough made of wood curved just so it bears the wear marks of years of use. yet looks as if someone might still come by to borrow it and never return. Elsewhere, a circular granary suggests that even in Neolithic times, no one really trusts their brother-in-law to just take a little. And in a particularly tidy refuse pit, archaeologists suspect that ancient villagers may have been the first to invent passive-aggressive composting, burying their mistakes one layer at a time. In the stillness of the landscape, only the rivers move with confidence, etching their will into the terrain. They're not entirely predictable, floods surprise courses shift, but over time they draw humanity inward, binding scattered homes into something more cohesive. Slowly, imperceptibly, a pattern begins to form. Pottery grows more uniform, fields expand. Trade routes whisper into existence first as goat tracks, and then as foot-worn corridors marked by the occasional broken jar or lost spindle. Grain flows not just from granary to fire, but from village to village. The land once dotted with lights like fireflies begins to glow with steadier warmth. Some believe this is where the story of civilization truly begins, not with a king or a conquest, but with a woman balancing a pot on her hip, walking a dirt path to a river that forgets nothing. She does not speak, but the sound of her footsteps soft against the dust is the first sentence in a very long chapter. The river does not rush. It stretches slowly across the plain, meandering with a purpose. Only it understands its silver skin gleaming beneath the soft press of morning sun. Along its banks life thickens, not in bursts, but in folds, layers of habitation pressed gently into the soil like thumbprints in wet clay. The Indus and the Saraswati twin lifelines do not roar or demand. They provide persistently and without pride, carrying glacial melt monsoon rain and the quiet expectations of those who live by their grace. In this hush between sky and earth, farmers move through the damp fields with ankle-deep patience, their tools sloshing through the mud like old companions who never stop giving advice. They bend, scatter smooth, and rise again, always in rhythm with something larger than themselves, something as formless as mist and yet as dependable as a morning pot of barley porridge. Silt, the river's lingering gift, coats the land in fertile silence. Year after year it arrives without fanfare, spreading its soft wealth like a shy benefactor. It turns furrows into promise, makes seeds dream of becoming stalks and sticks, to sandals so completely that it becomes part of the traveller. In some places it clings so thickly that walking feels like wading through history, each footfall tugged gently into the past. The people here do not name the river with grand titles or elaborate myths. They simply follow its moods, building their routines on its breathing. They know when it is time to plant, when to wait, and when to retreat, as though the river's calendar is written not in numbers but in tone and texture. Irrigation, though modest, begins to emerge ditches etched with quiet logic channels, leading from stream to furrow like veins across a palm. These lines suggest thought, but not conquest. The earth is persuaded, not forced. The people build bunds and embankments not to trap the water, but to coax it, like easing a sleepy child into a new room. The tools used for digging and planting, made of wood, bone, and later copper, carry the memory of every hand that shaped them. Some bear patterns etched for no functional reason, just the slow joy of marking something that serves. It is in these modest touches that the first hints of a civilization whisper through. Everywhere there is evidence of quiet design, granaries shaped to resist pests and moisture storage bins raised above ground, and fields laid out with more consideration than ceremony. Some archaeologists remark on the precocious complexity of these agricultural systems, marvelling that such coordination could exist without a central authority. Others suggest the presence of council's elders or rotating leaders, but no consensus has formed. Perhaps it is enough to say that people found a way to work together not because they were ordered to, but because the river insisted on rhythm, and rhythm requires companions. The system appears to run on cooperation and quiet compromise, which, though less thrilling than conquest, proves far more sustainable when one must share water with their neighbour. The Saraswati, now largely vanished, was once wide and vibrant, flowing through what is today dry scrub and ghostly dune. Satellite images reveal its pale scars beneath the surface ghost rivers, winding under fields and towns remembered by root systems and archaeologists with patient imaginations. The question of its disappearance is a soft mystery that lingers. Some believe tectonic shifts diverted its flow. Others argue for climate change and monsoon retraction. Whatever the cause, the people adapt as they always have. They move closer to the Indus. They build anew. But the memory of the Saraswati lingers, carried in stories not written, but perhaps whispered to children by candlelight, and forgotten again by morning. A faintly humorous observation emerges from the study of ancient watercourses. It appears that even 5,000 years ago, farmers found reasons to complain about upstream neighbours, irrigation schedules, and the suspicious disappearance of borrowed shovels. In one excavated site, tiny canals twist around each other like polite arguments, each turn carefully negotiated to avoid both flood and famine. Somewhere between utility and artistry, these channels suggest a people who knew that sharing water is an exercise in both patience and humility. And perhaps the first form of passive-aggressive communication was not a letter or a cold glance, but a slightly narrow ditch that happened to bypass your cousin's barley patch. The river's gift, of course, is not only food, but also movement. Canoes and flat-bottomed boats begin to appear carved from tamarisk, or assembled with bundles of reeds lashed and pitched. These vessels glide silently, carrying grain tools, even small flocks, across the calm stretches of the Indus. The rivers become corridors, not boundaries. Settlements dot their banks like pearls on a string, exchanging not only goods but habits, stories and ways of arranging space. Pottery styles begin to converge. Weights and measures appear with uncanny consistency, as if someone had mailed out the specifications, though no such postal system exists. It is a harmony without central conductors, a sort of prehistoric spreadsheet of etched ivory and intuition. In the fields beyond the riverbanks, seasonal festivals are hinted at not through temples or murals, but through refuse shards of fine pottery. Remains of burned offerings, heaps of shell bangles discarded all at once. The people celebrate, it seems, in cycles, harvest, flood, planting, rest. No idols or inscriptions declare divine favour, yet the abundance suggests ritual, not in the spectacular sense, but in the repetition of gratitude. Children likely run among garlands hung from simple wooden frames. Musicians may play drums, their rhythms echoing the river's own beat. It is a world shaped by water and mirrored by it, every element mutable, flowing, returning. Later scholars will argue whether this harmony masks complexity. Was there hidden hierarchy beneath the surface? Were there priests, officials, enforcers? The absence of palaces and grand tombs does not mean they never existed, only that they were not made to last, or perhaps not made at all. The debate lingers like mist after a morning rain, and no single conclusion settles comfortably in the soil. What is clear, however, is that the people chose to live alongside the river, not above it. They built with it, bent with it, rested in its shade. And so the river continues not as a stage for history, but as its co-author. In time it will carry more than silt bricks, beads, grain, copper, ivory, all the things a civilization carries when it begins to rise. But for now it carries stillness and the reflection of a heron standing very, very still, as the centuries drift onward like silt in the slow curl of the Indus. The scattered settlements begin to pull toward each other with the soft inevitability of gravity. A new pattern takes shape, not abrupt, not loud, but deliberate and visible in the earth itself. The dust is pressed flatter beneath more feet. Footpaths harden into streets. Bricks now of a standard size, sun-baked and stacked, with almost fussy alignment, begin to mark out walls, platforms, storerooms and steps. In the place that will later be called Harappa, and far to the south where Mohenjo-Daro rises by a quiet bend in the river, construction hums not with celebration but with consistency. Every house, every drain, every well speaks the same language of proportion, direction and clay. The cities do not erupt, they accumulate. The bricks are made by hand, one after another, shaped in wooden moulds, and left to cure beneath the same sun that once warmed barley fields and shepherds' backs. Their uniformity is not a symbol of oppression or industrial command, but of shared practice passed down like a favourite tool. There is comfort in the sameness, a kind of gentle reassurance that walls will meet at right angles and stairs will fit the foot. The inhabitants seem less interested in towers or monuments and more committed to the quiet dignity of sound construction. The layout of Mohenjo-Daro, with its rectilinear grid and straight streets, suggests not ambition, but agreement. Everywhere there is water. Wells dot the neighbourhoods with curious frequency carved brick cylinders that spiral downward into the water table, often beside bathing rooms tiled in careful arrangements. No two wells are identical, yet all speak the same architectural dialect. Bricks stacked in quiet spirals, each one a small promise of cool relief in a hot, dusty world. The people draw water not from one grand source, but from many private, modest wells, a pattern that seems to whisper something about autonomy and dignity. They live close together, yet each house remains its own island with its own hearth, courtyard and rhythm. Harappa begins to mirror this structure not as a copy but as a sibling. Its streets too align with the cardinal directions. Its granaries breathe with air vents. Its platforms rise slightly above the floodplain, as if in gentle defiance of the river's occasional tantrums. The city seems to listen to the river, but no longer obey it entirely. Raised mounds of earth built gradually offer protection without walls. Fortification, if it exists at all, is built into the layout in drainage elevation and careful avoidance. There are no moats, no battlements, no thrones or engraved depictions of victorious kings. If there are rulers, they leave no sculpted egos behind. Some archaeologists marvel at this, a civilization of cities without kings' armies or temples. Others caution that absence is not proof. Perhaps there were leaders, simply not the kind who demanded statues. Perhaps power was woven through ritual or clan, enforced not with bronze blades, but with shared silence. Or perhaps these were truly horizontal societies woven together by custom and trade and the quiet enforcement of predictable behaviour. The mystery sits patiently in the streets just beyond the curve of every corner, waiting for someone to ask a better question. The buildings themselves speak in low tones. Mud brick houses line the streets in tidy rows, each with a ground floor that opens into a small courtyard, and rooms that unfold in no particular rush. Many have staircases leading upward, their stone steps worn smooth by feet that climbed without announcement. Rooftops may have served as sleeping places during hot nights, or spots for drying grain and gossip. In some corners, fragments of painted walls suggest that decoration, while rare, existed, red ochre lines drawn around niches, maybe to protect, maybe to please. These flourishes do not shout. They smile faintly like someone who knows something and chooses not to say it. There is evidence of organisation, but not spectacle. The granaries in Harappa, raised on platforms and ventilated with foresight, suggest that surplus is not just stored but honoured. Massive brick platforms stand bare now, but once may have held wooden superstructures, airy chambers for barley wheat, and pulses guarded not by soldiers but perhaps by watchful elders or curious goats. Elsewhere, public well-stepped bathing areas and sewage drains indicate shared infrastructure and shared expectation. A person may keep to themselves, but they still must not clog the street drain. Even 5,000 years ago, neighbours have opinions, and yet humour finds a home in this symmetry. The standardised bricks found from the southern coast to the Himalayan foothills are so uniformly sized that scholars joke the Indus people may have had better building codes than modern contractors. In one unearthed building, walls curve slightly inward, prompting speculation that someone's uncle insisted on doing it himself. And in the neatly laid out streets, archaeologists have found almost no signs of traffic collisions suggesting either remarkable discipline or that honking hadn't been invented yet. The city is not lifeless. It breathes. Children likely play with toy carts, small terracotta vehicles found broken beside drains. Beads spill from workshops where artisans string carnelian faience and shell into patterns that catch the sun. Metal workers bend copper into tools and trinkets, hammering slowly in courtyards, while chickens wander uninvited across the workspace. Somewhere a dog barks and no one listens. Life is steady, layered and soft-footed. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa stand as mirrors of one another, though not identical. They share a logic that extends beyond geography, a worldview built into their bricks, a rhythm encoded in their layouts. From the raised platforms to the narrow alleyways, from the wells to the waste drains, every detail whispers we live together. We endure, we build forward. These cities are not testaments to dominion but to continuity, not to empire but to coordination. No palace marks the skyline, yet the cities last for centuries. In later years, explorers and scholars will walk among these ruins and wonder how such order arose without banners or boasts. Some will search for inscriptions, chronicles, or declarations and find none. Others will study the bricks themselves and discover what the cities have been saying all along, that silence, when carefully arranged, can last longer than any proclamation. The streets do not hurry. They stretch in straight lines, carefully laid out with the sense of balance so consistent it feels like a habit rather than a rule. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa both breathe through these corridors, arteries of fired clay and dusty patience. The bricks beneath the feet are uniform rectangular and set with the diligence of 1,000 practiced hands. At eye-level walls of homes rise quietly on either side, their mud brick facades giving little away, their doors facing inward toward shaded courtyards. Above, awnings and hanging reeds soften the sun, while narrow side alleys dart off like whispered conversations between neighbours. There is a calm to this geometry, a slowness that feels intentional, as if the cities are not meant to impress but to endure. Water moves just as deliberately, if not more so. Beneath the streets and along their edges, a network of drains guides wastewater away from homes and back toward the fields or riverbanks. Covered with fitted brick, some of these channels still hold their shape long after the rest of the city has crumbled into quiet ruin. Every house seems to have its own soak pit, a personal contribution to a larger system. It is not glamorous, but it works a soft triumph of shared design, the kind that earns no poem yet keeps daily life remarkably clean. Scholars remark that few ancient civilizations place such careful thought into sanitation, and some even suggest that the Indus cities were ahead of their time, which for a place with no visible rulers seems like the sort of joke the bricks themselves would appreciate. In the residential sectors, houses open toward the inside with little more than a narrow door to the street. Courtyards lie at the heart of the home, where meals are taken, tools repaired, and goats occasionally persuaded not to eat the laundry. Along one wall, a brick platform often marks the family's bathing area, where water is poured from painted jars and the day is rinsed away in rhythmic movements. A covered drain waits just beside, patient and efficient, carrying the used water off without complaint. Some houses are small, some 2 stories tall, but most share a similar plan not because they must, but because it works. Uniformity here is not enforced, it is remembered. The wells, hundreds of them, rise like quiet sentinels from the earth. Some are public, placed along main avenues where children gather with pots and laughter. Others belong to individual homes tucked into shaded corners, their water drawn by rope and ceramic bucket. The craftsmanship is humble but precise brick rings spiralling downward, lips smooth and worn by years of touch. The depth of these wells varies, some plunging more than 15 meters, an impressive feat for a civilization with no visible engineers, only generations of skill. In one well, archaeologists discovered a cluster of carnelian beads, perhaps spilled by a hurried hand or a tilted jar. It's tempting to imagine the sound they made, one soft clatter, then silence, and how long the owner stood peering down into the cool dark before giving up. The street drains, too, carry a kind of gentle elegance. Covered with slabs, they channel the runoff from homes, courtyards and workshops, sometimes intersecting with wider channels that slope ever so slightly downhill. In some places, inspection holes are built in simple vertical shafts, allowing clogs to be cleared, as if the people of the Indus foresaw not only problems but solutions. It is here that one scholar quipped the Indus cities were the first to invent planned obsolescence for goat hair and cooking ash. Another joked that if you stepped into an open drain, it was your own fault the rest of the system did its job. And in truth, the system rarely complains, even after thousands of years. Market streets intersect these residential lanes, wider and more open, with shop fronts and small stalls likely lining the edges. Flat platforms of baked brick may have once displayed beads, bangles, pottery, fish, barley cakes, and copper tools. Transactions are implied in the wear patterns on thresholds in the charred remains of hearths just behind shop walls. Though no coins have been found, weights and measures abound, carefully calibrated stone cubes that fit in the palm like arguments for fairness. Each is standardized, a part of a system that seems to prize accuracy without ostentation. Some are even marked with indentations, not numerals, but a kind of tactile clarity like a whisper of order in a noisy world. It is here, in the convergence of straight streets and careful drains, that the soul of the city reveals itself. It is not in monuments or declarations, but in infrastructure, the water that flows, the waste that disappears, the symmetry that persists even in decay. The streets are wide enough for carts, and though no wheels remain, their impressions linger, ruts carved faintly into the brick. Somewhere a pot falls and breaks. Somewhere else a baker scrapes burnt bread from his oven floor. Someone else perhaps leans in a doorway watching dust settle in sunlight, wondering if the rains will come early this year. Some scholars debate whether the precision of these layouts points to central planning, a council of elders or engineers organizing the grid with drafts scratched into damp clay. Others suggest it evolved naturally, a tradition of order handed down not by decree, but by imitation and shared memory. There are no blueprints left behind, no inscriptions directing how cities should be shaped. But the streets answer the question with their very presence. Even the smallest lanes seem to know where they're going. And through all of it, the scent of damp earth, the sound of distant copper striking stone, the calls of women returning from wells with pots on hips and stories in their hands. The street is not just a place to walk. It is a thread that ties the city together, a record not of events but of habits. Each brick, each turn, each echo of a footstep speaks of a people who understood that life does not need to be loud to be lasting. A final gentle humour lies in the fact that among all the careful planning, no one seems to have left a street sign. Mohenjo-Daro's excavation blocks are now named alphabetically by archaeologist DKGHRA, VSM, not because the ancients named them thus, but because modern minds needed a way to make sense of it all. Perhaps the Indus people didn't worry about addresses. Perhaps when you know your neighbours and your goats know the way home, signs become unnecessary. The city, it seems, remembers where everything is, even if we do not. There is no royal road to walk here, no towering statue casting its shadow over the city square, no monumental inscription chiselled deep into stone declaring conquest lineage or divine favour. The cities of the Indus do not wear their power on the surface. Instead, it hums beneath in the coordination of bricks, in the uniformity of weights, in the humbleness of sealed storerooms and elevated granaries. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa hold their order like cupped hands, steady and unshowy, and in this quiet balance arises one of the civilization's most intriguing mysteries, a society without kings, or at least none that insist on being remembered. Unlike the pharaohs of the Nile or the priest-kings of Mesopotamia, the Indus leaves behind no thrones, no epic steles recounting battles, no tombs stuffed with gold. If power exists here, it moves softly behind doors beneath sandals, in the way a drain is always cleared before monsoon. In public buildings, those few that stand apart from domestic clusters, the architecture remains undecorated and functional. The so-called citadel mounds of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa rise gently above the rest of the city, their brick foundations suggesting platforms, assembly areas, perhaps spaces for storage or ritual, but not for rulers to survey a crowd. There are no grand temples upon them, no carved faces gazing down in stone immortality. Scholars puzzle over these platforms. Are they administrative hubs, civic spaces, or merely elevated flood protection? The structures refuse to answer, offering instead only right angles and silence. What remains of authority here is ambiguous, embedded not in figureheads but in systems. A stamp seal carved with intricate figures, a bull, a horned man, a procession of animals suggests the transmission of goods and identities. These seals, often made of steatite and hardened by heat, are pressed into lumps of clay, affixed to bundles, jars, or baskets. Some scholars propose that they served as signatures, identifiers of ownership, or tokens of approval. Others wonder whether they marked religious offerings, commodities in trade, or simply familial symbols. Whatever their purpose, they speak to a shared agreement, not of faith perhaps, but of function, a community that trusts symbols and conventions more than the singular voice of a king. In one excavated building of Mohenjo-Daro, often dubbed the Great Granary, though this label is cautious and unofficial, long brick channels crisscross beneath wooden flooring that no longer survives. Some believe these were air vents for drying grain, others argue they had no such purpose. Without written records, all is interpretation, and yet the scale of the construction implies communal effort. A structure built not for a single person, but for a city. Nearby wide stairs descend into a raised platform, another suggestion of shared purpose. If these were gathering spaces, they were not designed to impress, they were designed to work. The absence of obvious rulers does not mean the absence of order. On the contrary, the level of urban planning, the standardization of brick sizes, the coordinated waterworks, the consistency across cities hundreds of kilometers apart, all suggest something remarkably cohesive. There is no hint of chaos. In fact, the silence of the Indus is not empty. It is composed. The cities unfold like a woven mat, flat, interconnected, useful and elegant in its restraint. One archaeologist, somewhat amused, once remarked that the Indus may have invented bureaucracy before inventing drama. Another joked that perhaps the leaders were so efficient no one felt the need to carve their names into walls. A quiet anecdote emerges from Harappa, where a collection of terracotta figurines was found, animals, people, and curious horned beings sitting cross-legged. They are small and stylized with arms bent forward and calm, expressionless faces. Some speculate these are deities. Others argue they may be toys or teaching aids or charms. There are no inscriptions to clarify, no altars nearby to suggest ritual, only their presence lined up as if waiting for someone to ask a better question. Among them sits one particularly serene figure eyes, closed hands resting on knees, posture poised and relaxed. Scholars have suggested yogic influence, though cautiously as always. Whether it's a proto-meditative pose or a coincidence of posture, the figure seems to embody something the civilization itself understood well: stillness, balance, and the power of sitting quietly in the middle of a busy world. And still humour seeps through the bricks. In a row of identical cubical weights found scattered across sites, a discrepancy of a fraction of a gram in one leads some to speculate that, even in the most disciplined system, someone always misreads the manual. In another site, a carefully laid drain jogs awkwardly to one side, bypassing a brick that someone clearly forgot to move. Perhaps they shrugged and said it would settle over time. In a neighbourhood of Harappa, multiple homes have staircases that ascend to nowhere, the upper floors long gone or never built at all, a series of architectural punchlines left for archaeologists to decipher like ancient knock-knock jokes without punchlines. There is a theory floating gently like dust over the plain that perhaps the cities governed themselves through collective memory, a long-standing agreement of how things should be built, used and repaired. The kind of knowledge that doesn't require instruction, only example. Children learn by watching their elders lay bricks, fix wells, align doorways. Each generation contributes not by changing everything, but by maintaining what already works. It is a leadership of imitation of custom of rhythm. What becomes increasingly clear is that the power in these cities does not reside in individuals, but in patterns repeating trusted unspoken. The repeated shapes of rooms, the careful angling of drains, the standard sizes of storage jars. All of it points toward a worldview where the collective outweighs the singular, where identity is woven into utility, and where prestige may lie not in decoration but in durability. In the end, the Indus cities do not raise voices. They do not boast or conquer. Instead, they suggest gently, persistently, that civilization can be shaped by hands rather than hammers, and that power, when dispersed across many, may leave behind fewer names but longer echoes. The water sits still in the great bath. No ripple breaks its surface, no voices echo from its silent brick walls. This sunken structure, tucked carefully into the raised mound of Mohenjo-Daro's western district, holds an aura not of grandeur but of hush, a purposeful silence that clings to its smooth steps and tightly fitted bricks like mist to early morning reeds. Built with painstaking precision, its floor sealed with bitumen, its perimeter defined by thick baked brick. The bath seems less like a utilitarian space, and more like a place where movement slows and time agrees to wait. A broad stair descends from either end into the rectangular pool 9 meters long, each tread worn faintly smooth by centuries of bare feet. These were not the steps of haste, but of return of ritual rhythm and repetition. All around, small rooms cluster like satellites, some with water drains, others with raised platforms that may have served as dressing areas or meditation spaces. The architecture suggests both privacy and presence. One can be seen and unseen part of the ritual, and yet wrapped in solitude. No iconography shouts its meaning. There are no carved gods, no written instructions, no relics of a cult. The great bath is what it is, a body of water set into quiet brick, carefully shaped by unknown hands for purposes that remain delicately unclear. Some say it is for purification, a ritual immersion before ceremonies now lost. Others propose civic or even therapeutic functions, perhaps a place to cleanse the body and calm the mind in equal measure. The debate remains, as does the bath, quietly indifferent. The sense of intentionality is unmistakable. Water enters and leaves through concealed drains, the inflow likely from a well, the outflow guided down a brick-lined channel. No stagnant pool, this but a breathing system alive with the careful choreography of hydraulic knowledge. It is this thoughtful design, not size or splendour, that impresses. No throne room in all of Mohenjo-Daro matches the solemn dignity of this open basin, where no ruler sits, and no inscription claims ownership. In its symmetry and its silence, the bath holds something older than memory and steadier than names. In the adjacent buildings, archaeologists have uncovered a few curious artifacts, seal fragments, miniature altars, votive figurines scattered but suggestive. One seal shows a figure seated cross-legged, flanked by animals' horns rising from its head like branches. Some propose a proto-deity, perhaps an early version of a yogic figure or guardian of thresholds. Others caution against interpretation, reminding us that meaning drifts easily when no one remains to confirm it. And still the figure sits unmoved, as if waiting for the question to be asked properly. Some scholars have suggested that the bath and its surroundings served as the spiritual heart of the city, not through grandeur or doctrine, but through routine. A place one might enter at dawn in silence before beginning a day of trade labour or study. In this theory, the bath is less about religion and more about readiness, a recalibration space, a way to align inner and outer order as one aligns bricks along a foundation. Perhaps the civilization's emphasis on cleanliness, symmetry and water management speaks not just to utility, but to belief that purity and clarity belong in the built world as much as in the self. A sleepy joke lingers at the bath's edge. Among the many excavated drains and pipes, one leads directly away from the structure, vanishing beneath a later wall. Some theorize it was an overflow. Others suspect it might have been the city's first passive-aggressive plumbing dispute. And when considering the meticulous sealing of the bath's bricks with bitumen, one can't help but imagine a particularly stubborn foreman grumbling that if the water seeps one more time, I'm moving to Harappa. In another nearby room, a raised brick platform bears such symmetry that scholars joke it could only have been designed by someone who really hated asymmetrical towels. Beyond the bath, purification seems to echo through the city's infrastructure. Houses with private bathing areas and street-side wells suggest a culture where water is not just a necessity, but a companion present at thresholds woven into daily rhythm. In some homes, small jars filled with finely sieved sand are found possibly for abrasive cleaning. Others yield conical perfume bottles, hinting at a sensory experience tied to grooming, perhaps ritual or simply comfort. The people of the Indus do not seem to divide the sacred and the ordinary with rigid lines. Rather, they let reverence seep into the bricks themselves. This soft integration is perhaps the most striking feature of the Great Bath, and its surrounding structures nothing feels intrusive. There is no compulsion in the design, only invitation. The steps do not demand obedience. The water does not promise salvation. Instead, the space suggests a choice, a pause in the day's motion, a return to a central stillness. Whether that stillness is spiritual, civic, or psychological remains unspoken, which is likely the point. Even the bath's location, elevated above the floodplain yet embedded within the urban fabric, reflects this balance. It is central but not dominating, important but not exclusive, accessible yet set apart. This in-between quality feels deliberate, a liminal space between public and private motion, and rest surface and depth. One can imagine the sound of a foot slipping gently into the water, the soft slosh, the moment of immersion. Not a spectacle, but a return. The question of belief in the Indus Valley remains unresolved. There are no temples in the Mesopotamian sense, no ziggurats, no carved pantheons arrayed in stone, and yet there are fire altars in some settlements ringed with ash. There are figurines, seals, tokens, and structures like the Great Bath. Each hints without insisting. Some scholars have argued for early forms of ritual practice centered on natural forces, water, fire, fertility. Others suggest more abstract beliefs, ancestral reverence, or community rites. But always the evidence resists loud conclusions. It sits in place, weathered and whole like the bath itself, enduring, functional, mysterious. And perhaps that is its final gift. The great bath does not offer answers. It does not seek to be decoded. It allows the viewer, the visitor, the excavator to sit beside it and feel for a moment the coolness of ancient water, the gravity of stillness, the presence of something just out of reach. It reminds us that some places are built not to teach, but to hold gently, precisely, and without explanation. In the narrow workshops scattered across Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, in the quiet layers of debris left by craftsmen and traders, in the tiny seals carved from soapstone, and the symbols etched into potsherds, a mystery curls itself like smoke around the ruins, the script that does not speak. Across the breadth of the Indus world, from dusty village outposts to city granaries, hundreds of stamped seals, broken tablets, and brief incised lines offer fragments of something that might be writing, yet no translation has ever emerged. The characters are small, neat, often fewer than 5 in a row, arranged with care above the figures of animals, deities, or geometric patterns. They appear consistent, deliberate, and purpose-driven, but whatever purpose they served is now lost in the long quiet between excavation and understanding. The symbols vary slightly, but certain forms recur with a rhythm that suggests grammar, or at least repetition. A trident-shaped glyph appears often, as does a fish-like shape, a comb, a pair of vertical strokes. Each is too precise to be random, too widespread to be local, and yet too brief to be understood. Some scholars propose that these are not words at all, but names, labels for goods or tokens of trade. Others believe they may represent a full language now vanished entirely unlinked to any known script. Without a Rosetta Stone, without a bilingual inscription, without longer text to analyze the script, remains a closed door without hinges. Still, the seals persist. They are found everywhere, in homes, in warehouses, in streets, in wells. Some bear animals, the unicorn bull, a fantastical creature that dominates the Indus imagination, always shown in profile, single curved horn curling forward, like a question never answered. Others feature elephants, tigers, zebu cattle, crocodiles, each rendered in graceful curves, balanced compositions, and a serenity that belies their wildness. The seal makers are precise. They carve with a light touch, but a firm hand, often on squares no larger than a coin. The detail is astonishing, the symbolism intentional. What's carved matters. What's missing matters more. A curious seal from Mohenjo-Daro shows a figure seated cross-legged on a platform, surrounded by animals, an elephant to one side, a tiger to the other with antelope below, and what may be a rhinoceros above. The figure wears a horned headdress and multiple bangles, and its hands rest on its knees in a pose of composure, not command. Some call it Proto-Shiva, the Lord of Beasts, an ancient precursor of later Indian religious thought. Others caution against retrofitting modern interpretation onto undeciphered symbols. The truth rests in the clay, not in our projections. The seal's meaning has dissolved into time, leaving only its elegance behind. One gently humorous theory suggests that the brevity of Indus inscriptions might point to a society that disliked paperwork. No lengthy hymns or epics, just labels wheat from Harappa, property of that guy with the tiger seal. In another interpretation, the script is seen not as a record, but as a symbol of presence not meant to be read, but to be felt. The stamps may have been administrative or spiritual, mundane or sacred, or both. The civilization seems comfortable with ambiguity. They commit to symbols, but not to explaining them. In the workshops, fragments of failed seals gather in corners like unsent letters. Some bear incomplete carvings, others have been snapped or scorched. The artisans use tools of copper and stone, peering close. working by lamplight or daylight spilling in through slatted rooftops. They grind the steatite down to soft texture, then harden it with fire. The process is deliberate, repeated across centuries. The seals are then pressed into damp clay, leaving reverse impressions that dry and harden, possibly for marking goods, authenticating deliveries, or denoting ownership. The economy of the Indus flows not on coins but on trust and token. Seals are found far beyond the cities, in Lothal, in Dholavira, even along the Makran coast where trade routes skim the edges of desert and sea. They appear always carved with that same steady hand, that same unreadable language. Some scholars suspect a merchant class wielded them like modern business cards, passing them between colleagues, pressing them into clay tags, exchanging not only goods but networks. Others suggest priestly authority with seals functioning as sacred approvals or ritual permissions. Still others wonder if they were talismans kept for protection, passed down like heirlooms with no need for translation. The enduring riddle of the script draws comparisons. Egyptian hieroglyphs shout in stone. Sumerian cuneiform carves its syllables into wet tablets with bold angularity. But the Indus signs are modest. They never overstay their welcome. There is no evidence of long inscriptions, no storytelling on walls, no sprawling religious texts. It is a civilization that builds extensively, crafts beautifully, trades widely, and yet leaves behind only the faintest whisper of its voice. If the seals were ever read aloud, their echoes are now lost in wind and dust. In a dim museum drawer, a rare seal shows not an animal or person, but a strange scene. Two figures with raised arms flanking a central object, possibly a tree or column. Below them, a row of symbols marches confidently across the edge. It looks ceremonial, perhaps narrative. It suggests a moment of importance now utterly unplaceable. One archaeologist joked that it might be an ancient advertisement, 2 for 1 at the barley shop this week only. Another remarked that even if we decipher the script tomorrow, it might just say, handle with care. In the end, the Indus script resists not only translation but urgency. It sits patiently on its steer-tight squares, unfazed by modern curiosity. Its repetition across sites shows it mattered. Its brevity suggests restraint. Its survival implies care. Whatever it meant, name, prayer, inventory, declaration, it meant it again and again in quiet confidence. And the civilization, so careful in its design and so content in its silence, never bothered to leave us a key. The script endures not as a message waiting to be decoded, but as a reflection of the people who shaped it, precise, composed, and comfortable in their own unspoken logic. In the morning light, the narrow streets awaken with motion too subtle to announce itself. The clang of copper against stone, the rustle of grain sacks being lifted into carts, the soft bleating of goats tied outside workshops, all of it adds up to the low hum of daily commerce, unceremonious and uninterrupted. Along the main avenues of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, wider than the residential lanes, open spaces serve as market grounds, not fenced or roofed, but embedded into the rhythm of movement. There are no marble forums or towering arches here, only brick platforms, shaded stalls, and a steady exchange of goods that begins before the sun has fully claimed the rooftops. Clay jars line the corners full of lentils, wheat, barley, and sesame. Fine silts from the Indus cradle them into mounds that smell faintly of dust and sun. Potters bring their wares stacked in staggered towers, round-bottomed cooking pots, ridged storage jars, delicate terracotta toys shaped like carts and birds. Some carry conical objects with perforations, perhaps incense burners, or maybe cheese strainers. The marketplace does not make clear distinctions. Utility and ritual sit side by side, woven through the same hands. Metal workers arrive too, their goods wrapped in cloth or carried in woven reed baskets. Copper blades, fish hooks, chisels and bangles, dull in colour but smooth to the touch, with edges that speak of patient skill. In one corner, a bead seller opens his satchel and pours out a cascade of colour. Tiny discs of carnelian agate faience and shell spill onto a flat tray like a dry river of colour, each bead drilled with near-invisible holes. They rattle faintly as he sorts them, some already strung, others loose, all polished until they catch the dusty light. These beads travel far, not just from one neighbourhood to another, but across deserts and oceans. Traces of Indus ornaments have been found as far as Mesopotamia, nestled in the ruins of Sumerian cities, passed from palm to palm like secrets that don't need words. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, turquoise from Iran, and marine shells from the Arabian coast find their way into this gentle chaos of exchange. No empire is required for this, only boats, trails, memory and trust. Weights and measures sit on low shelves, their stone cubes worn but exact. Carved in binary multiples 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, the system feels less like improvisation and more like precision wrapped in humility. There are no scales on display, only counterweights and balance arms, sometimes fashioned from ivory, sometimes from simple wood. Each transaction is quiet, neither haggled nor dramatized. A nod, a gesture, a shared understanding that the barley weighed today will still weigh the same tomorrow. The presence of standardized weights across sites hundreds of kilometers apart from Kalibangan to Lothal to Rakhigarhi hints at a culture not merely trading but agreeing. That agreement, unspoken and sustained, may be one of the Indus civilization's most lasting achievements. Among the more curious items in circulation are seals, not just symbols of identity, but instruments of economy. Pressed into soft clay, they leave impressions that mark goods for shipment or approval. A sack of grain destined for another city may carry a bull seal. A package of beads might bear the mark of the horned figure seated beneath his tree. No written invoices accompany these goods, no lengthy lists or registries. The seal and the item together seem enough. Some modern scholars have compared this to early brand logos or company stamps, a prehistoric shipping label rendered in soapstone. Others prefer to see the seal as a promise someone has touched this, approved it, trusted it. At the riverbank, boats wait. Flat-bottomed, made of planks or bundled reeds, they rest half-submerged in the shallows, tied to sun-bleached posts. Trade does not rely solely on carts or footpaths. The river is a highway as well as a wellspring connecting inland cities, with port towns like Lothal, where harbours carved into the estuarine edge allow ships to ride the tide. Excavations at Lothal reveal a docking basin lined with bricks, perhaps an early port, although some scholars contest its purpose, citing the complexities of tidal flow and sedimentation. Whatever the exact function, the evidence is clear: this civilization moves. It trades not just goods, but ideas, styles of pottery, motifs on seals, proportions in city layout. Influence like water flows both ways. A handful of imported items turn up among the ruins. A cylinder seal from Mesopotamia here, a fragment of Sumerian pottery there. Tiny travellers that suggest contact across vast distances. The routes these goods followed are now lost in sand and theory, but their presence lingers like stories told across campfires by sailors watching for stars above unfamiliar coastlines. It is not empire that drives this trade, but continuity, a web of interlocking preferences, needs and habits that stretch across regions like an unbroken thread. A sleepy joke hides in one excavation layer where a standard weight was found, but it had been shaved on one side just enough to tip the balance without attracting attention. Archaeologists, amused, labelled it the earliest known creative accounting. In another trench, a potter's discard pile included several lopsided jars, their necks too narrow, or their bases askew, evidence that even 5,000 years ago some products just didn't meet the standard. And in a warehouse site near Harappa, dozens of seal impressions were found stacked in a corner, as if someone had been conducting an inventory and grown suddenly bored halfway through. The scale of the economy remains difficult to pin down. There is no currency in the traditional sense, no minting, no coinage, but there is value clearly held and exchanged in grains, metals, beads, textiles, and livestock. Markets function without marketplaces, trade routes operate without charters, and agreements are kept without contracts. The system runs not on oversight, but on rhythm. A kind of shared expectation passed down through hands rather than laws. The more one looks, the more the Indus world feels less like a network of cities, and more like an organism pulsing, adapting, and self-correcting. The traders, artisans, and carriers remain faceless, their stories unrecorded, their names lost. Yet their legacy lies in the fingerprints pressed into bricks, in the grooves of beads worn by years of touch, in the balancing weights left behind on warehouse floors. They speak not through titles, but through texture, and in the subtle machinery of exchange, in the quiet flow of goods from house to stall to harbour. The Indus Valley Civilization reveals itself again not through spectacle, but through the steady breath of its markets beating softly beneath the dust. In the stillness between trade and ritual, beyond the markets and platforms, lie the homes, quiet, rectangular, practical dwellings nestled close together, but each drawing a distinct line of privacy. From above they form a patchwork of rooftops and courtyards, punctuated by staircases that rise with stubborn utility, and windows that turn their faces inward. The streets may belong to the city, but the homes belong to the family, and the boundary between the two is marked not with walls of intimidation, but with thresholds low enough for a pot to be passed across. The houses of the Indus are made not to impress, but to endure sun-baked bricks. Timber lintels, mud-plastered walls and courtyards, swept so routinely that even the dust knows where not to settle. Each home is an island of rhythm. The day begins with the thump of grinding stones as women prepare grain in the courtyard shoulders, moving in time with the stone's circular sigh. In a corner a child pokes a stick at a lazy goat more curious than mischievous. Overhead laundry strung between beams flutters slightly in the breeze that drifts through the high-walled lanes. The air smells faintly of smoke and wet clay of breakfast bread crisping against the side of a small earthen oven. These scents blend into the memory of a place lingering in walls that have seen hundreds of such mornings pass without ceremony. Most houses share common features: a central courtyard open to the sky, around which rooms cluster with modesty and precision. Some are simple, a single room with a hearth, a platform for sleeping, a few storage jars aligned in the cool shade. Others unfold into more complex arrangements, 2 or even 3 rooms a second floor reached by narrow brick stairs, a private well or a bathing area floored with brick and drained with quiet care. There is order here, but it is lived, not enforced. Every space has a purpose, even if that purpose changes with the light. A sleeping room becomes a weaving room. A quiet corner becomes a grain store. The home, like the civilization, adapts without fanfare. In some homes, painted pottery lines the shelves white slip-on red with fish motifs, peacocks and trees drawn in careful, deliberate strokes. These jars may hold lentils water, or perhaps nothing at all. They may be purely decorative or intended for a future guest who never arrived. The pottery's shapes are familiar across sites. Shallow bowls, narrow neck jars, cooking pots with loop handles. Evidence of a shared visual language, one that does not shout but murmurs in curves and clay. The kiln fires burn quietly at the city's edge, tended by potters who understand that smoke travels like gossip and must be managed with care. The inner life of these homes leaves few direct traces, yet everywhere there are clues. Terracotta toys line corners, wheeled carts, spinning tops, figurines with arms akimbo or painted headbands. Beads sometimes lost between floor bricks suggest someone once sat cross-legged here, threading them together, perhaps humming. Bone combs, copper mirrors, and coal applicators found in private rooms hint at grooming not as vanity but as routine, part of being seen, even if only by oneself. In some houses, rows of storage bins line a wall, their interiors charred by fire or worn smooth by years of use. The rhythm of living is written into these objects, their wear and polish, as legible as any text. There is a quiet humour to be found in the archaeological record of domestic life. In one house, a latrine was built so close to the kitchen that scholars speculate someone misunderstood the blueprint, or perhaps believed strongly in convenience over sensibility. In another, a staircase leads up to a platform with no roof and no railing, prompting jokes about the world's oldest patio parties or ambitious pigeons. And in one particularly tidy dwelling, 3 miniature terracotta dogs were found neatly lined along a shelf as if guarding the memory of a family that took their figurine security very seriously. What is most striking about these homes is not their luxury or poverty, for they seem to exist within a narrow, consistent range, but their dignity. There is no great disparity in size or ornament. Even the more elaborate houses of Mohenjo-Daro differ in scale, not philosophy. The civilization appears to have valued equity over extravagance, routine over display. This is not a world of palaces and shacks, but of neighbours and courtyards. If there was hierarchy, it wore soft shoes and closed its doors with care. Some scholars wonder at the implications of this, a civilization with cities but no visible elite class, no sprawling estates or high-walled compounds of the powerful. Perhaps status existed in subtler ways, in seal ownership, in trade connections, in the number of bangles one wore, or perhaps it simply mattered less. The archaeological silence on this point has become one of the Indus Valley's gentlest mysteries. In a world where so many past societies announce themselves with grandeur, conquest, and inequality, carved into stone, the Indus cities respond with a row of tidy brick homes, aligned with sunlight and rainfall, built to last and to blend. Even the way these homes are constructed speaks to forethought. The bricks are laid in patterns, sometimes alternating headers and stretchers, to provide stability and cooling. Some walls have niches built not as afterthoughts, but as part of the plan, small shelves for lamps, jars, or personal objects. Drainage is a priority even in the smallest homes. A plan exists to carry water away, often through a sloped floor or a side outlet. No element is haphazard. Even when the walls crumble, the logic remains. As dusk falls, shadows stretch across the courtyards and stairwells. The city does not glow with torches or lamps, it darkens softly, slowly. Inside the homes gather their own warmth. Fires are banked mats, unrolled copper vessels set aside. A silence settles, the kind that lives between familiar walls and beneath a reed ceiling. The same silence that once welcomed bead threaders, grain grinders and potters now wraps itself around the ruins held gently by brick and dust. The homes endure not because they were grand, but because they were right, built to human scale, to human habit, to the quiet hope that life should be steady, and rooms should face the morning sun, out in the open lands beyond the walls and wells where brick gives way to loam, and the lines of the city dissolve into furrowed fields. The quiet labour of the civilization continues beneath a wider sky. Farmers, potters, coppersmiths, fishers and boatmen, each tied not to titles but to tools, shape the living framework of the Indus world. Their days begin before the cities stir with the sound of oxen hooves pressing into damp soil of grain being sifted between fingers of nets, unfurling into sluggish brown water. The hands that hold the beads in market stalls and the pots in courtyards are the same ones that turn the wheels, mend the hulls, and press seed into earth. There is no single face to this civilization's economy, only many backs bent gently to tasks performed with quiet pride. The farmer walks his fields with a familiarity that precedes ownership. He carries a wooden plough yoked to oxen, its shape unchanged for generations, slicing shallow grooves into the soft, silty earth after the monsoon has withdrawn. The seeds fall into place without ceremony. Barley, wheat, lentils, chickpeas, all drawn from baskets woven tightly enough to keep out mice and memory alike. There are no grand irrigation works, no sweeping aqueducts or royal water schemes. Instead, simple channels divert seasonal water to where it is needed, and bunds those low earth embankments guide it gently like parents guiding children towards sleep. The rhythm of sowing and harvesting follows the pulse of the rivers. In years when the rains arrive late, the fields wait patiently, and so do the people. Fishermen line the river's edge with nets weighted by smooth stones casting into the current and pulling their catch with the ease of long practice. Fish are smoked dried or cooked in round pots over open flames. In some sites, fish bones appear in such abundance that one might imagine entire neighbourhoods waking to the same breakfast scent, a soft smell of river and fire that clings to walls long after the meal. Near the coast in settlements like Balakot, the sea adds its voice. Shells are gathered, sorted and drilled to become bangles and beads, while salt is coaxed from evaporated pools gathered in broad pans and traded inland. The seafarers less visible in the record must have travelled narrow coasts and open waters alike, their reed or plank vessels skimming the edge of the known following stars mirrored faintly in the tide. In the workshop set back from the city's bustle, artisans work slowly, not to deadlines but to daylight. The copper smith heats his crucible over charcoal coaxing liquid metal from stone with the patience of one who has no rush and knows that fire is a partner, not a servant. From the glow emerge blades, hooks, chisels and delicate rings. Each is cast or hammered, filed and cooled, tested with the tap or the press of a thumb. Most copper tools are utilitarian, not decorative. They are shaped to work, not to shine. But the skill behind them gleams quietly visible in every curve that fits the hand, in every blade that bites cleanly into timber or hide. Next door, a beadmaker drills carnelian, that hard ruddy stone that resists the hand using a bow drill strung with cord, the motion rhythmic and hypnotic. The holes are minute, sometimes so fine that modern tools struggle to replicate them. To look at a single bead under magnification is to see a world of balance and control. Once drilled, they are polished, often heat-treated to deepen their colour, then strung with others in sequences that hint at taste fashion, or meaning now unrecoverable. Beads lie buried across thousands of years and thousands of kilometres, found in tombs in Mesopotamia, in hoards in Gujarat, in riverbeds and ruins alike. They speak not with words, but with form a language of patience and travel. Among the humbler trades is that of the washer, a person who scrubs cloth clean using river water, sand and knotted fists. The washing platforms along Mohenjo-Daro's side streets slope gently toward brick drains, and among the finds in those drains are threads and fabric impressions that suggest linen or cotton. The Indus people may have been among the earliest cultivators of cotton, spinning its fibres into thread on simple spindles, weaving cloth that dries quickly in the sun and catches the breeze like a sigh. What they wore we do not know in certainty, but the fragments speak of drape and lightness, of clothes made for movement and heat, of dignity in daily wear. A dry humour lingers in the archaeological hints left behind. In one potter's dump, misshapen vessels are stacked like failed auditions walls, too thin, rims, uneven bodies collapsed in the kiln's embrace. It is tempting to imagine a craftsman muttering to himself as he begins again. At a bead workshop in Mohenjo-Daro, several unfinished beads were found, alongside worn tools, as if someone simply walked away for lunch and never returned, And in one coastal site, an oven was rebuilt 3 times with slightly different brick patterns, each adjustment suggesting the eternal optimism of someone convinced they had finally figured out the airflow. What emerges from all this work is a portrait not of elites or monuments, but of continuity. No single name is preserved. No signature graces the blades or pots, yet every tool, every bead, every brick shaped by these anonymous hands contributed to the texture of a world so enduring that its ruins still hold their shape 5,000 years later. These were not dreamers of empire, but stewards of craft, navigators of necessity, improvisers who worked with sun soil and silence. The civilization breathes through them. It does not thunder forward with conquest or spectacle. It moves slowly like water around a bend, shaping what it touches, and leaving behind only the traces of presence, the calloused grip of a plough, handle the thumb-smoothed rim of a pot, the groove worn into a drill by repetition. The Indus Valley does not build in marble. It builds in gesture, in habit, in hands that knew the weight of their work and the lightness of letting it speak for itself. In the hum of daily life behind the quiet labours and shared courtyards, a deeper rhythm seems to pulse through the Indus cities, a kind of social order, not written in edicts or etched into stone, but built into brick, water and routine. There is no great divide between rich and poor in the archaeological record, no palaces looming over slums, no signs of oppression carved triumphantly into walls. Instead, the evidence speaks of uniformity, not of stagnation, but of cohesion, a society that leans toward balance, toward harmony, not through rule, but through rhythm. The grid-plan streets, the consistent architecture, the standard weights and measures all point toward a people who understood cooperation not as an ideal but as a requirement. Houses, whether modest or more expansive, follow similar designs. Wells are shared or repeated. Drains run across neighbourhoods without regard for property lines. Workshops and homes blend seamlessly. The entire city seems to breathe with one lung, every part necessary, none dominating. Scholars wonder at this. Was it communal governance, a council of elders, or simply a shared memory that instructed each new generation how to build and live whatever the source it appears to have worked? For centuries the civilization persists across vast distances with a startling degree of consistency. Cities hundreds of kilometres apart reflect the same logic, the same proportions, the same whispered instructions passed from hand to hand like a favoured tool. Even burial practices suggest a preference for moderation over monument. The dead are laid in simple pits, sometimes with modest grave goods, a few beads pottery, perhaps a copper mirror. There are no extravagant tombs, no sprawling necropolises claiming divine status for the deceased. This is not a culture of pyramids or ziggurats. Death, it seems, was handled with the same steady tone as life, carefully, respectfully, but without ostentation. The dead lie beside the living, not above them, and in that there is a kind of quiet equality. Ritual too appears to follow this ethos. While no grand temples dominate the Indus cities, there are signs of sacred practice fire altars at Kalibangan bathing platforms and the Great Bath itself. But these are woven into the fabric of the city rather than set apart. Sacredness is not sequestered behind high walls. It flows through the same drains, shares the same courtyards, touches the same bricks. Figurines of women, of animals, of mysterious horned beings are found in homes and workshops alike, not hidden in sanctuaries. If worship happened here, it was personal, habitual, almost domestic in its scale. Among the artefacts, a small terracotta model of a plough drawn by oxen was uncovered, its wheels slightly crooked, its proportions gently exaggerated. Some believe it was a toy, others a symbolic offering. One archaeologist humorously suggested it may have been the earliest known attempt at work-life balance. Another joked that perhaps even in prehistory children dreamed of being farmers, or at least of bossing around their siblings in the fields. In another home a wall niche was found containing a broken bowl and 3 tiny beads placed with care. Whether offering memory or shelf cleaning no one can say, but the gesture is human and it endures. This pervasive tone of order without spectacle leads to a question that haunts every excavation. How was this harmony maintained? The absence of weapons, fortifications and royal imagery suggests a society not driven by military might or autocracy. There are no records of laws, no proclamations, no visible coercion, and yet the cities function. The drains remain unblocked. The bricks remain aligned. Trade continues. One theory proposes that social cohesion came from a shared worldview not imposed but internalized. A system of norms so deeply embedded in daily life that enforcement was unnecessary. Everyone knew how things should be, because that's how they had always been. This kind of soft governance is difficult to detect in the archaeological record, which prefers the noise of kings and battles to the murmur of custom. But perhaps that is the Indus Valley's quiet gift, a model of civilization not based on conquest but on calibration. A civilization that holds itself together not through spectacle or fear, but through mutual understanding and unspoken agreement. One where balance is not just a metaphor but a design principle echoed in every waitstone, every courtyard, every drain. Still mysteries remain. Were there classes? Were there specialists who rose above others in status or wealth? It is possible. Some homes are larger, some neighbourhoods more densely built. Certain materials like lapis or ivory appear more selectively, but the differences are subtle, not glaring. The cities do not divide themselves into gilded centres and forgotten edges. They unfold evenly like fabric pressed flat beneath a careful hand. One of the most striking symbols of this order is the ubiquitous cubical weight. Found across the civilization, these stones come in predictable sizes from large to minute, their ratios precise. A merchant in Lothair and one in Harappa could exchange goods using the same system, never having met, and still agree. It is a small miracle of trust. Even today, standardization is hard won, yet here it exists across centuries and thousands of kilometers without obvious enforcement. That speaks not to control, but to consensus. And yet even in this orderly world, traces of individuality appear: a child's footprint baked into a brick, a wall etched with a casual pattern of dots and lines, a pot painted with a tree that seems to dance in the wind. These are not signs of rebellion, but of personality folded gently into the routine. The society may be harmonious, but it is not faceless. It moves with the grace of many lives woven into one pattern. As dusk settles over the brick rooftops and wells fall silent, the city doesn't sleep so much as slow its breath. Lights flicker behind closed doors, sandals are placed neatly at thresholds, and the smell of lentils stews the air. The order of the day gives way to the quiet of night, but the pattern remains steady, patient, collective. It is not a utopia, nor is it a mystery solved. It is something softer, rarer, a world that worked not loudly, but well. The balance does not break in a single moment. It shifts quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the settling of bricks in a wall, long after the mortar has dried. Over time, the rhythm that once held the cities in unspoken alignment begins to falter. Drainage systems, once meticulously maintained, accumulate debris. Kilns go cold and remain unfired. Bead workshops fall silent, their tools left where they lay. There is no fire, no invasion carved into walls, no sudden layer of ash to suggest catastrophe. Instead, there is only a slow pause drawn out over decades, perhaps centuries, in which the world of the Indus begins to withdraw from itself without drama. In Mohenjo-Daro, Later layers of occupation reveal changes. The carefully laid bricks give way to reused ones, sometimes smaller, often misaligned. Buildings are reconstructed atop older foundations, sometimes without regard for symmetry. Streets that once flowed in straight lines now curve awkwardly around encroachments. Private homes expand into public lanes. Wells are dug hastily, their masonry looser, their lips cruder. The city does not vanish, but it forgets its plan. The soft agreement that once shaped it begins to unravel not from defiance but from neglect. Perhaps fewer people remain to keep the rhythm. Perhaps new needs override old habits. Perhaps the system simply grows tired. Evidence of declining infrastructure appears subtly. Drains are blocked, and refuse collects in corners once swept clean. Pottery styles become simpler, less uniform, more hurried. In one neighbourhood, storage jars are stacked against walls, not in recessed bins, but on bare floors, as if placed there temporarily and never moved again. At Harappa, granaries once raised on brick platforms are reused for other purposes, their precise air channels filled in their role diminished. The same bricks that once measured out public order now disappear into walls of irregular homes. Reuse, improvisation, adjustment, all signs of resilience, but also of strain. Scholars debate the cause of this decline. Some point to environmental changes, the gradual drying of the Saraswati, the shifting courses of rivers, the retreat of monsoons that once fed fertile fields. Others consider tectonic activity, slow earthquakes that redirected water or fractured irrigation lines. Still others suggest internal pressures, trade disruptions, social fragmentation, or the erosion of the very systems that once held harmony together. There is no consensus. The mystery is preserved like the civilization itself, not buried under one answer, but folded into many. Outside the cities, rural settlements appear to persist longer, even as urban centres dwindle. Smaller communities continue to farm, to shape pottery, to live beside slowly fading rivers. The great cities empty not all at once, but piece by piece. A workshop closed here, a well gone dry there. Families likely move toward more reliable water sources, toward rising centres elsewhere. Perhaps they carry with them fragments of memory, the proportions of bricks, the steps of bead-making, the weight of a familiar stone cube. These are not migrations of conquest, but of necessity, of quiet farewell. In Lothal and Oliveira, signs of resilient surface. These sites endure longer, adapt more visibly. But even here the marks of contraction are plain. Trade networks thin. Imported materials grow scarce. The sophistication of earlier layers gives way to simpler forms. It is not collapse in the dramatic sense. It is retreat, a gradual closing of doors like shutters drawn against a dust storm no one names aloud. A dry joke lingers in the later archaeological layers. In one room a latrine drain is redirected with a sloppy brick curve, clearly an afterthought. The scholar who excavated it dubbed it the world's earliest plumbing shortcut. In another house, a series of walls are built in such a hurry that one of them blocks access to a previously used stair. Perhaps someone decided they no longer needed to go upstairs, or simply preferred a different route. Change, even in its quietest forms, leaves behind clues, as irregular as they are human. There is no sign of war. No hordes of weapons, no mass graves. The Indus Valley's disappearance does not resemble the fall of empires so often taught in textbooks. It is not a sudden end, but a gradual dissolving. The cities fade like breath on glass, slowly, steadily, until only their foundations remain. And even then they hold on. The bricks remain in place long after the people have gone, weathered but upright, as if waiting for return. Later in the Vedic texts of early Indian culture, the Indus cities are not named. They do not echo in myth or scripture. Their memory disappears almost completely, as though buried not just in earth, but in time itself. For thousands of years no one speaks of them, though the rivers they once shaped continue to flow quieter, now edged by newer settlements built atop the bones of older ones. Civilization does not cease. It moves, turns, reforms itself elsewhere. But something of the Indus, its silence, its order, its refusal to proclaim itself, seems to vanish completely. What remains is not failure, but stillness. A civilization that left no monuments to kings, no self-congratulatory texts, no epic of conquest or divine favour, instead leaves behind symmetry, drainage, pottery and patience. Even in its decline there is no collapse, only adjustment, reduction, migration. Only the long breath of a world slowly exhaled. It is perhaps this refusal to dramatize its own fading that defines the Indus Valley most clearly. Other civilizations fall with a crash. This one, it seems, chooses to step quietly away. As night falls over the abandoned lanes and wind sweeps silt into open courtyards, the bricks endure their long sleep. They have seen fires lit and extinguished, beads strung and scattered, drains cleared and blocked. Now they wait beneath the open sky, not as ruins, but as echoes, the last sound of a world that preferred to whisper. The final gestures of the Indus cities unfold, not with endings, but with slowing, a soft diminuendo across rooftops and fields, a thinning of footsteps along the brick-laid streets, a silence that does not descend all at once but grows like shadow. As the great centres empty, they do not collapse but settle into themselves, their courtyards filling with wind-blown leaves and dust from faraway hills. Roofs fall in slowly, not torn down but left to surrender. Kilns go quiet. Water jars left beside crumbling wells gather spider silk instead of hands. And through it all the bricks remain weathered but unmoved, watching the world grow still. In Mohenjo-Daro, the uppermost layers speak of change of spaces, repurposed alleys, narrowed homes partitioned with hastily laid walls. The fine geometry of earlier generations is softened not by violence, but by time and improvisation. Where once there were carefully drained bathing areas, now stand pits dug by need and patched with scavenged bricks. Courtyards once open to the sky are roofed crudely darkened for reasons unknown. Tools once shaped with exactness begin to appear rougher, less balanced, as if their makers no longer had access to the same resources, or simply no longer cared for precision. Even the seals, those once dignified squares of carved identity, become less frequent, their symbols thinner, the animals etched with a hurried hand. In some places the city is not abandoned all at once, but in patches. A house remains inhabited while the workshop next door falls into disuse. A well continues to draw water, even as the drain beside it clogs with fallen silt. Archaeologists find layers of continued life amid decay, a hearth rekindled in a collapsed room, a new wall built over an old street. There is resilience here, even in retreat. The people do not vanish, they adapt, they linger, they turn inward, and eventually they leave, but not with ceremony. The end is not a line, but a fade. Outside the city's small settlements persist. The Indus world does not vanish, but disperses like embers carried on the wind. Rural life continues in new forms along different riverbanks in different arrangements. Pottery is still fired, though less elaborately. Crops are still grown, though, without the vast infrastructure of the old. Some scholars speak of cultural continuity of the Indus spirit reappearing in later traditions, reconfigured but not erased. Others see the cities as a unique experiment, a model of order that was lived for a time and then let go. The truth may lie somewhere in between, folded into the earth like a note that is kept but no longer read. Environmental factors likely played their part. The rivers changed course. The Saraswati dried or moved underground, leaving its settlements stranded from their source. Floods may have overtaken parts of Mohenjo-Daro more than once. Salinization of soil, over-farming, changing trade winds all offer explanations, but none quite satisfy. The Indus Valley Civilization, so defined by water and its management, may have ultimately yielded to it not in a moment of destruction, but in the quiet erosion of dependability. A well that dries, a channel that silts, a year when the rains do not come. Even in this slow disassembly, traces of life remain. In one of the last layers of Harappa, a small hearth is found beside a broken wall, its ash still black against the clay. Someone built it there, not caring that the room around it had crumbled. Nearby a bead unfinished, unpolished lies beside a dull copper awl, as if the maker had stepped away expecting to return. These are not artifacts of despair, but of persistence. Until the last people continue to shape their world, to cook, to make, to sit beside a small fire in a great city that was almost gone. There is no single site that marks the end. Instead, the centres dim one by one. Kalibangan falls silent. Lothal's docks no longer echo with traders' steps. Dolavira, once bright with sunlight on white gypsum bricks, retreats into the salt and stone of the Ran of Kutch. And the people, whoever they were, however they understood themselves, pass into landscapes where their names are not remembered. Not one personal name has come down to us. Not one ruler, poet, priest, or potter. They left no epic, no genealogy, no stone recounting deeds. Their story remains in rooftops that face the wind, in weights shaped to fairness, in drains designed to carry waste away from where people lived and gathered. There is a quiet kind of greatness in that. To endure so long without conquest, to shape so much without spectacle, to build with intention, and vanish without wreckage. Other civilizations write their ends in fire. This one leaves behind only stillness. The streets do not burn, they blur. The walls do not fall, they wait. In some places even now water still seeps through ancient bricks, guided by a channel made thousands of years ago. The drains continue their work long after the footsteps have faded. A faint smile surfaces in one archaeologist's journal, noting that some of the later brick walls were built with such improvisation that they likely confused even the goats. In another layer, a mud brick platform was constructed directly over a former street corner, perhaps as a shortcut to reach a favoured neighbour, or perhaps just because someone grew tired of turning left. Such moments, though unrecorded, feel familiar. The last inhabitants of these cities were not strangers to complexity. They simply carried it differently, less in symbols, more in habits. As the Indus Valley Civilization recedes, it leaves no trace of lament, no images of mourners, no carvings of loss. Only the blank surfaces of homes no longer lived in granaries, no longer filled wells, no longer drawn. And yet in their absence something lingers, not absence but presence held gently in pause. A civilization does not end when its cities fall, it ends when its memory does. And for centuries the Indus lay sleeping beneath fields and villages, its name unspoken, its streets unvisited, its story folded quietly beneath the tread of those who did not know they were walking above a vanished order. Until rediscovery. But that comes later. The cities lie hidden now beneath the dust and crops of centuries, their outlines softened by time, their bricks swallowed by soil that forgets slowly. For generations no one speaks their names if they were ever spoken, and no stories carry forward the shape of their streets or the rhythm of their days. Yet the ruins remain not erased, only covered like a book, closed but not lost. In Harappa, the land becomes farmland. In Mohenjo-Daro, the mounds rise like natural hills scattered with wild grasses and occasional pottery shards that glint beneath the sun. The wind moves across them, as it always has, stirring ash from forgotten hearths, scattering the memories of a civilization that preferred silence to spectacle. For nearly 4,000 years, the Indus Valley Civilization sleeps in its dust-wrapped tombs, unmarked by legend or lineage. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, it does not survive in stories or sacred texts. It lingers only in the bones of its city's foundations that do not speak wells, that do not draw seals, that still bear symbols but no names. Farmers plough over rooftops without knowing their oxen treading across what were once courtyards. Stones from ruined buildings are carted off to repair roads or line canals. The bricks so uniform, so easily stackable, serve new purposes, unaware they once formed bathhouses and granaries. The past dissolves into the present unnoticed, undisturbed. Then slowly in the mid-19th century, questions begin to rise. A railroad is planned across the Punjab, and engineers seek solid brick. They find mounds at Harappa covered with grass and mystery, where the bricks lie in neat ancient rows too precise to be natural. They are removed by the thousands and repurposed into the railway that will eventually link Lahore to Multan, carrying with it the first unconscious echo of what it buries. The site is not yet recognised. It is used, not studied. Only later do surveyors return with notebooks instead of wheelbarrows and curiosity instead of quarrying tools. Excavation begins in earnest in the 1920s. The mounds of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are peeled back layer by layer, their shapes revealed by careful hands and soft brushes. What they uncover astonishes. Streets aligned with geometrical logic, homes with bathing platforms and private wells, drainage systems more sophisticated than some found in later cities, standardized bricks, meticulously planned layouts and seals inscribed with scripts no one can read. The cities emerge not as crumbled chaos, but as organized ghost towns, a symmetry from the past preserved beneath chance. Archaeologists expecting temples and kings find no palaces, no statues of rulers, no great tombs. Instead, they find order, quietness, precision, and absence. It is this absence that most defines the rediscovery. Where others left grand narratives carved in stone, the Indus left systems. A civilization without visible hierarchy yet functioning on scale. A world without war memorials yet connected by trade across vast distances. Every layer pulled from the earth suggests coordination, not conquest. And still the script resists. The seals remain mute. Each discovery answers one question and opens three more. Who lived here? How did they govern themselves? Why did they leave no name behind? The tools of modern archaeology bring clarity to some mysteries and deepen others. Carbon dating, satellite imaging, comparative analysis all help sketch the outlines of a civilization once forgotten. But the heart of it remains elusive. The Indus Valley seems to have chosen anonymity. No grand narrative emerges. No king's name dominates the ruins. Even the cities themselves are known to us only by the names of nearby villages. The people, whoever they were, did not memorialize their own greatness. They built it, lived in it, and when it was time, walked away. Some scholars try to connect the Indus people to later cultures in South Asia. They point to continuity in brick size, in weight standards, in patterns of settlement. They find echoes in ritual practices, in symbolic animals, in the structure of homes. Yet nothing is definitive. The river between then and now is wide and much of it uncharted. Still the shapes remain, not the words but the grammar, the way the cities breathed, the way the walls were laid, the way the drains remembered to flow downhill. These too are forms of memory. There's a quiet humour in the rediscovery itself. In the early years of excavation, reports are sometimes inconsistent. One team writes of discovering strange bathing arrangements, unaware they're standing above one of the oldest known examples of civic sanitation. Another describes seals, likely ornamental, unaware they hold the only known examples of the Indus script. And in one corner of Mohenjo-Daro, a latrine is initially mistaken for a temple. a reminder that interpretation often travels backward before it moves forward. The ruins, patient as ever, offer no correction. They let themselves be misunderstood before being understood. Today the site's protected, though still threatened by time, salt groundwater and human hands. Mohenjo-Daro in particular faces steady erosion from within. Its bricks pulled from the earth now face exposure they were never meant to endure. Preservation efforts work carefully, balancing access with care. Tourists walk where no feet have stepped for millennia. Guides explain the city's layout to visitors from distant lands, standing in what was once a bathing room or granary, gesturing to foundations whose meaning remains only half visible. And yet even in partial recovery the Indus speaks, not in proclamation, but in design, not in heroism, but in habit. Its rediscovery is not a triumph, but a return, the slow uncovering of a world that never sought to be remembered, only understood. And perhaps in its refusal to carve itself into history, the Indus Valley Civilization preserved something rarer. The idea that greatness need not be loud, that civilization need not be crowned in conquest, that memory can live in bricks, in drains, in the space between certainty and silence. As the sun sets once more over Mohenjo-Daro's western mound, the light turns soft, brushing gold across the edge of the great bath. Wind moves over the stepped stones, stirring nothing but a few grains of sand, and the occasional breath of warmth that rises from earth long warmed by time. Somewhere in the dust a broken bead glints faintly, as if remembering the hand that made it. And above the sky begins to darken, not with ending, but with stillness. The ruins rest now beneath a sky that has watched them for 5,000 years, each brick catching light as it always has, each foundation holding its line against the subtle pressure of wind and gravity. The world has changed beyond recognition, but these stones remain anchoring a memory that no one fully owns. Walk slowly through the broad avenues of Mohenjo-Daro, and the past does not speak, it listens. Step between the thresholds of Harappa, and the quiet gathers not as absence, but as presence held gently just out of reach. This is not the kind of history written in conquest or broken by fire. It is the kind that endures in stillness, shaped not by declarations, but by how well a drain was laid, how carefully a wall aligned with the sun, how evenly a pot cooled in the morning breeze. The Indus Valley Civilization leaves behind no saga. It has no founding myth, no rise to power, no legendary collapse. It whispers instead in evidence, in the frictionless convergence of geometry and habit, in the persistence of a city grid used for generations, without the need to explain itself. The people who lived here did not leave us their names, but they left us their shadows cast in brick, their intentions pressed into tiny seals, their hands shaped into every edge of the world they built. No king rises from this silence. No priest tells the story, yet somehow the story continues. The script remains unread. Hundreds of symbols, tridents, fish, combs, lines, loops repeat across thousands of tablets, tokens, and seals. They are brief, consistent, and precise. They do not ramble, they do not boast. Some have tried to crack them to find a linguistic relative to link them with Dravidian or Proto-Elamite, or even lost tongues entirely. But the signs resist translation, as if they are not waiting to be deciphered, but merely to be accepted. Not all communication asks to be understood. Some of it only asks to be recognized. And so the signs remain not meaningless, only unspoken. Modern scholars continue to debate. Was there centralized authority? Was religion formal or informal? Did trade collapse or evolve? Were the cities abandoned because of environmental change or societal drift, or a quiet reshaping of what life needed to be? The answers shift as new evidence appears, each excavation revealing both a deeper complexity and a wider humility. The Indus world seems designed to elude final conclusions. Its story moves sideways, not forward. Its meanings rise like river mist seen best in the morning and never held in the hand. And yet, despite the mystery, or perhaps because of it, the Indus Valley continues to resonate. Not as a faded relic, but as a model of something quietly extraordinary. A civilization built not on spectacle, but on systems, not on power, but on coherence. Its cities functioned across distances without central rule. Its artisans produced beauty without monumentality. Its trade reached across seas, but its identity remained local, domestic, human-scaled. In an age when grandeur often came at the cost of suffering, the Indus left behind no evidence of violence. No armies, no sieges, no slave pits, just symmetry, trade, and quiet. A small joke found in a recent survey map notes how often staircases in Mohenjo-Daro lead to nowhere, upper stories long gone, but the steps remain. Some scholars see this as evidence of loss, others suggest reuse, and one simply said even in collapse they planned ahead. In one ruin, a child's footprint fossilized in a brick tells of a moment not recorded in any record, small, unimportant, and enduring. Someone ran where they weren't supposed to, and the clay kept the secret. The seals, with their precise animals and silent glyphs, still travel. They are packed into museum drawers and mounted in quiet glass cases from Karachi to Delhi to London. Visitors pause before them, trying to draw meaning from the figures, the unicorn bull, the yogic figure, the horned deities. But the seals reveal nothing. They invite only attention. Their makers did not demand immortality. They crafted tokens, used them, and left them behind. The rest was never meant to be retold. And still we try. The bricks too tell stories. They remain one of the most tangible legacies of the Indus Valley, standard in size, laid in predictable patterns, familiar across every site. Even today, some construction in South Asia still uses proportions close to those of ancient Indus bricks. It's as if the hand that shaped them once set a rule that time was reluctant to forget. The measure of civilization here is not in what was built tallest, but in what was built well, and what stayed standing long after its builders were gone. In the softest hours of morning, when light first returns to the wind-brushed edges of Mohenjo-Daro, the past does not feel far. Birds settle on ledges shaped by hands long vanished. Grasses stir across rooms once filled with breath and sound. The air is not empty. It carries the outline of vanished motion, pots being filled, beads strung, staircases climbed, bread-broken children bathed. The ruin does not mourn its own stillness. It simply waits the way it always has. To walk these streets today is to move through intention, the deep kind laid brick by brick, day by day, without the need to be remembered. A civilization does not need a king to be great, nor a scripture to be wise. The Indus Valley leaves us neither, and yet it leaves us enough to know that lives were lived here with order, with care, and without cruelty carved into the record. Perhaps that is the rarest legacy of all. And so, beneath the dust of centuries and the gaze of stars that have seen every rise and fall, the Indus Valley remains not in name but in form, not in story but in structure. A civilization that spoke in water and brick and then chose to fall silent. Evening drapes softly over the forgotten courtyards of Mohenjo-Daro. Warm light retreating across the old bricks' shadows, lengthening in doorways where no voices rise. A hush settles in the empty streets where dust lifts gently in the breeze, curling along drain edges and rising over broken thresholds. Somewhere a stair still climbs to where a rooftop once opened toward stars. The silence here is not heavy. It is spacious calm, shaped by centuries of wind and the patient hush of slow erosion. Above the sky deepens indigo, stretching wide, pinpricked by stars that watched this world begin, watched it change and now keep watch still. Beneath the soil, the rhythm of that ancient life continues to rest. Fire-kissed potsherds nestle in packed earth. Walls lean with time but do not fall. A bead lies cradled in dust, perfectly bored through its colour, softened by long forgetting. Water once channeled with precision now seeps unmeasured through the ground. Roots curl through abandoned drains, seeds drop into cracks. Night air gathers in the hollow spaces where grain was once stored, where hands once washed, where breath once rose in quiet homes. There is no sound now but the distant murmur of wind passing over the plain, and the faint rustle of grass brushing against old stone. The past does not ask to be heard. It remains folded into stillness, into cool clay and quiet outlines. No name rises from the ruins. No voice calls out. Only space remains for wondering, for dreaming, for remembering something without needing to know its shape. And in that space sleep draws near, gentle and slow, like a pot lowered into a deep dark well.